Hey everyone, Microsoft Azure recently released NVMe support for virtual machines, but not all sizes support it as of 2024. So this video will highlight the current method of creating a VM with an NVMe OS disk. Let's get started by creating a VM in the Azure portal. If you can't find the option, you can always use this search bar above and type virtual machines. Once you're on this page, hit on Create and select Create a Azure VM. Now you'll see a whole bunch of options, but don't worry, I'll take you through them all. So first, let's go with a resource group. If you don't have any, you can create and name it anything you want from right here. Name your virtual machine right here. I'm naming it NVMe-E8BS5 because that is what the VM size will be, and I'll come to that in a second. The region will be according to your preference. I'm leaving it at default East US. For availability, I don't need any, so I'll select no infrastructure redundancy required. Now, the security type is an interesting topic, and I'll circle back to this later, but essentially, NVMe does not work with trusted launch type, but I want to showcase this myself, so just hold on. Now, coming to images, you want to go with Windows 11. You want to select Enterprise version 23 H2X64 Gen 2. Now, jumping to sizes, this is an important one. Click on See All Sizes, and you'll see a huge list of sizes that are available to you. I already have a filter for NVMe, so I'm seeing a very few sizes, but if I remove it, you'll see tons of options, everything that Azure has to offer. Most of these sizes are SCSI in nature, so you want to filter to the sizes that support NVMe only. To do that, add the filter from here and select Disk Controller. As you can see, it's SCSI or NVMe. We're selecting NVMe for this video. Once you click OK, you should see the relevant sizes. I'm selecting E8BSV5, but you can have your preference here. As you can see, if your size qualifies for NVMe, Azure says you can upgrade for free by going into the Advanced tab. We'll go it in a second, but let's finish up all the basic details on this page first. I'll input a username and password and check the licensing box. And now let's get back to the security type and show you why Trusted Launch doesn't work. Now, if I jump to Advanced, scroll down a bit, and you'll see Performance NVMe, and you'll see that the checkbox is grayed out. You can read more on Azure's documentation by hitting Learn More. But for now, we'll change from Trusted Launch to Standard, and that should be it. Go back to Basics and select Standard, and come back to Advanced and select the Performance checkbox. Make sure you select this, otherwise you won't be able to take advantage of NVMe, and your VM will launch as SCSI instead. The rest of the options are completely default and untouched, but I'll just show them once for the sake of the video. In the networking, you can select Delete NIC and IP address so you don't get charged after deleting the VM. Management, monitoring, and the rest are untouched. And now let's validate and check our final options. Taking a little bit of time, okay? Good. The validation is done, and you can verify all the options. But the most important one is Disk Controller at the bottom, and make sure it says NVMe and not SCSI. And now I'll hit on Create, and it should take a few minutes to get ready. While we're waiting for this, let's create our second VM with the L-series size, which features a 1.7 terabytes of an attached data disk drive, which is NVMe in nature. But the thing to keep in mind is that it is an ephemeral storage, and I'll show you what I mean by that later. But what's different about L-series size is that the OS disk, which is the C drive, will still be SCSI, and only the additional data disk is NVMe in nature. The extra disk is not charged separately, so you can store a huge amount of data on it, as long as you don't stop the VM, otherwise you'll lose all of it. Let's get to it. Follow the same steps as before. There aren't any changes, except you can select Trusted Launch with this, because the OS disk will still be a SCSI drive. Okay, I've exhausted by vCPU quota, so I'll select East US 2. Doesn't matter. Now I'll select the L size, but in order to do that, you'll have to remove the filter we previously added and look for L series. The deployment of the other VM is complete, which is good. It is storage optimized, which is why it offers a huge 1.7 terabytes of extra NVMe local storage. You want to select that and fill all the other details as we did previously. If you check in advance, performance is grayed out, which is intended because the OS disk won't be NVMe in nature. Let's go ahead and create. And if you check the options, yes, indeed, you can have a trusted launch and disk controller will be SCSI. Let's deploy this while we jump into the other VM that is ready to go. Let's RDP into the VM and connect. Here I have connected to the VM. Let's accept. And now first you want to open partitions to check the disk layout. As expected, your C drive, which is your OS disk, is the 127 gigabytes of premium SSD. Let's open the Task Manager, and here's the confirmation that it is indeed a NVMe Premium Virtual Disk. Let's open MS Info 32 and Components and Storage. Where is it? There we go. Under Disks, you can also see NVMe Premium SSD. And if you check SCSI, usually the NVM Express controller will be missing. Anyways, now we've confirmed and learned how to create a VM that is directly attached to an NVMe OS disk. Remember that you're not charged anything extra for it, so it's basically a free speed boost for your VM. So we've seen the E series, and now let's look into the L series. I'll copy the IP and jump into the RDP in a second. Now that's the L series VM. Let's accept and open Task Manager to see the difference. As you can see, there are essentially three disks over here. One is your C drive, one is your D, as you can tell, Microsoft Virtual Disk, and the disk 0 is your ephemeral NVMe disk, aka temporary storage. The rest are SCSI in nature. Let's open disk management again, and you'll see the pop-up to initialize the disk. You'll need to do this every time, by the way. Every time you deallocate the VM. That is what is meant by ephemeral storage. Anyways, select GPT and install that disk. Once initiated, you can assign a drive letter to it, but currently it won't have any. Let me show you. If you go into this PC, you'll see the C&D drive, but not the 1.7 terabytes data disk, so you'll have to assign it a volume name first. You can see here, there are 3 disks attached to this VM. Now, so we'll create a simple volume with the unallocated disk. Just keep hitting next. You can assign a different drive letter if you want, but I'll keep it default here. You can also make changes here, but they're not needed. Hit on next and finish. And voila, you have successfully attached the 1.7 terabytes of NVMe storage to your VM. The same can be verified in Task Manager, and let's check MS Info 32. If you see drives, the first is C, that is 127 gigabytes, which is the default OS disk drive. Second is D, that is your temporary storage. And lastly, your NVMe direct disk, which is 1.75 terabytes in size. Now, for the last part of the video, I want to display how ephemeral storage works. Let's create a random note and put some random data in it. I've stored that in the temporary NVMe F drive, and now I'll restart it and see what happens. Now the VM has restarted, and let's check the F drive. Okay, the note is still there, so you can be rest assured that restarting won't make you lose your data or detach your disk. Now let's try stopping the VM does, and let's see what happens. I'll hit on stop, and Azure will deallocate the VM. Okay, so spoiler alert, but all my data inside the NVMe disk is now gone. The moment you deallocate a VM with ephemeral storage, you will lose all the data stored inside that disk. Now that it has deallocated, let's wait for a few more seconds and start it again. The lesson here is you don't want to store any important files that you can't afford to lose in that temporary data disk drive. You're better off creating a VM like we did with the E-series and get that extra storage. Now, I'll jump back to the VM and see what happened to the NVMe disk. Now if I open File Explorer and check, oops, the F drive is completely gone, erased. No signs of it ever existed. If we try to open our note, it says they can't find it. So that's what ephemeral storage is about. And as I said before, you'll have to initiate the disk every time you deallocate the machine. I'll quickly create the volume, and as you can see, the volume is completely empty and any data stored within is gone. Conclusion? If you want a ton of storage for temporary use, like transferring a huge file or dataset, get an L-series VM and use the 1.7 terabytes for your work. But if your data is important to you, get a normal VM instead. Now to delete both these VMs, a neat trick is to delete the resource group itself and forget about ever getting billed for it. Type the name, select Force Delete, and delete the resource group. Hope you guys learned something. Thanks for watching.